We're talking about benchmark revisions, and we saw a chart, if we can bring the graphic maybe back, that goes back through the year. Talk to us about what this is and why it's so important. Because this is a different kind of non-farm payrolls number in terms of importance.
There are two benchmark revisions today. One to the establishment survey, which is companies, and what they did is they go back and look at tax records, and they found that there were roughly 274,000 fewer jobs over the past year that ended last March than we had thought. So that gets factored in. But at the same time, they also made a methodological change. Used to count nannies, household workers, cleaning ladies, that sort of thing, as employed by people as opposed to companies. Those people were moved into the labor force that's counted as company workers, so that adds a lot. So you're getting a higher level of employment over the past year, but not because more people were employed, just a counting error. The other change is to the population estimate. As Peter said, last year this was a huge deal because the population estimate was raised significantly. This year doesn't look like it's all that much, so it isn't going to affect the unemployment rate, the participation rate, the way it had last year.
What do you think about this, Richard? I mean, you were saying you thought 140 before. That was already below consensus.
Right.
But,
well, I think I was surprised at the construction number.
Even through the snow, right?
Yeah. And strength in manufacturing, strength in construction.
Well, the funny thing about construction is that construction workers can do other things when it snows, like drive snowplows or remove,
and that counts in the construction.
And that would count because they would count as being on the payroll.
I see.
You only have to be on the payroll for 1 day or 1 hour actually during the pay period, which is the week that includes the 12th of the month. So that was that week. We had the extreme cold the week before. We had a big snowstorm the week after. During that week, people could get to work at least for an hour, so they get counted.
So we had the extreme cold, we had the changes to the accounting, we also had the expiration of a lot of the unemployment benefits, but still this number, 118,000, well below consensus estimates of 180,000.
Well, and Peter
combined
says
with last month, it does look like momentum is coming out of the job market.
Exactly. But Peter says the weather didn't have as much of an effect in January. Peter, why that?
Well, let me just walk you through a couple numbers that help tell us that story. As Mike said, the actual survey week was not all that bad for a January week. It was not as bad as other weeks in the month, and we had 694,000, for example, reporting that they got part-time work that usually would have been full-time work, but the reason they could only work part-time was because of the weather. That number was over 1 million in December, so and 694,000 again, not all that different than what we saw the prior January. We also had a number of people, 262,000, said they had a job, but they couldn't get to work because of the weather, again, lower than the December numbers. So these are not all that inconsistent with prior January's weather. Certainly a factor, but weather's always a factor in January around the country. And
I would also just point out that, you know, they pointed out retail as a soft spot. We heard from Sam's Club, we heard from JCPenney, we heard from Macy's, all cutting jobs after disappointing December holiday
Of course, at
sales.
JCPenney, right?
Fine, whatever you want to say.
Because no one goes there.
Interesting story in the Wall Street Journal yesterday saying that 1 in 6 men aged 25 to 54, prime working age, I believe all of you are within that category.
Go to JCPenney?
1 in 6, don't go to JCPenney, are unemployed. That's incredible. That's about what?
1 out of 6 that.
1 out of 6 men aged 25 to 54, prime working age, are unemployed in the United States right now.
Interesting.
I mean, you know, the amazing thing to me is that we continue to watch the rate drop, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Is that good for the administration when a lot of people are talking, I mean, about the fact that people are just dropping out of the labor force, which is why the rate drops?
But the rate is the headline number. I mean,
right.
Everyone goes, well, unemployment is down again. I mean, that can be the takeaway.
And the Fed looked at the rate, right?
The Fed is looking way past the rate because they know it is distorted, but the average American is just reading the headlines. I mean, there's a famous story back in the Reagan administration about a reporter who did a very critical piece on the president, got a call from the president's aide who said, great story. She said, why? He said, because people only look at the pictures. They're not listening to what you say. And so at this point, people are looking at that headline number and probably feeling it's a little bit better. Let me go back to that for just a second, this population control thing. The problem you have with the unemployment rate is it's not directly comparable to what we saw in December because of these benchmark revisions, but the revisions were so small that it really doesn't affect the fact that that is good news for a change. This is not a story about people dropping out of the labor force. Labor force rose significantly, and it's not because of the benchmark revisions. It's because a lot more people told the household survey that they were employed, and a lot fewer people said they were unemployed. So you've got the kind of mix you want to see in the household survey. It's not reflected in the establishment survey. So this is kind of a mixed report. It's not as bad as it looks on the surface.
And I'm assuming no one thinks this will change the Fed's approach towards reducing bond purchases.
Well, and they get a couple more employment reports before the next time they meet.
Yeah.
So we'll have February, so they don't have to,
All right. Our thanks to you, Michael McKee.